Hey everyone, Nigel and Luke here, and welcome to Crime Zone. Though it's true that most unsolved deaths tend to invite a fair amount of speculation, when those deaths involve high-profile or wealthy figures, the sense of mystery is automatically multiplied. Not only do these cases inspire all of the normal explanations for an untimely death, given the extraordinary lifestyles of those involved, it's tempting to believe that the reasons behind their deaths must be equally remarkable. This often leads to outlandish or conspiratorial theories cropping up around the deaths of the extremely wealthy, even in the absence of more realistic explanations. However, without definitive answers, there's always the chance that even the strangest theories may just be true after all. Today, we wanted to focus on a few such stories, taking a look at the cases of several wealthy people whose deaths have inspired enduring mysteries. Before we get to our list, don't forget to like and subscribe to Crime Zone for more true crime content like this. It really helps us to continue building the channel, and if you've watched a bunch of our videos already, you might not even realize that you're not subscribed. While you're there, make sure to hit the notification bell to stay up to date with our latest releases. As always, we're extremely grateful for everyone who has helped support the channel. With that out of the way, here are 4 wealthy people who died mysteriously. On the morning of December 15th, 2017, employees of Canadian pharmaceutical billionaires Barry and Honey Sherman arrived at the couple's Toronto mansion to start their usual routines. First to turn up was the Shermans' housekeeper, who made weekly visits to the property every Friday. She was followed by the Shermans' personal trainer, who the housekeeper waited for by a side door. The two women began to notice a couple of curious details right away. For starters, Barry was not in his usual spot in the kitchen reading the newspaper. He was typically ready to go as soon as the personal trainer arrived, and would do an hour-long workout before his wife's 2-hour session at 9:30. Also strange, though the door had been locked, the alarm was off, the first time that this had happened in the housekeeper's 3 years of working there. Neither the mail nor the newspaper had been collected. After venturing upstairs to the Shermans' bedroom, the housekeeper noticed that the bed was uncharacteristically made, and that the sink that Honey normally used was dry. When she returned to the kitchen, she informed the personal trainer that the Shermans must not be home. Though this was strange, it seemed like there could be a reasonable explanation. The housekeeper knew that Barry and Honey were planning to travel to Miami for Christmas, and that they had flights booked for the 25th and the 18th respectively. Maybe they had simply decided to leave early. Honey's Lexus SUV was still on the driveway, but it would not have been uncommon for her to leave it behind if she were going out of town. A short time later, the Shermans' realtor, Elise Stern, arrived with another realtor, Wei Dong Zhao, and 2 of his clients. Barry and Honey had recently put their $7 million property on the market, while they worked with a custom home builder to design a new residence in Forest Hill. Stern was scheduled to give a tour of the property to the clients, who were prospective buyers. As such, the group ventured into parts of the house that had been previously undisturbed by the housekeeper and personal trainer. Everything seemed fine until Stern brought the group to the indoor pool area, located in the mansion's basement. That's when one of the buyers commented that it looked as though the homeowners might be down there. When Stern went a little closer to investigate, she was horrified by what she saw. Barry and Honey Sherman were dead. Frantically, she called 911. When police arrived at the scene, they confirmed the grisly details. The Shermans were found fully clothed in a semi-seated position on the pool deck, facing the wall. Their arms were behind their backs, though unbound, and there were 2 black belts looped around their necks with the other end attached to a railing. An autopsy would later reveal that the cause of death for both of the Shermans was ligature neck compression. It was also estimated that the couple had likely been dead for a day or more before the discovery of their bodies. This would match records obtained by police, as calls and emails to Barry and Honey had gone unanswered for almost 2 days. News of the Shermans' death shocked their family and friends, as well as members of Canadian high society. Before this, they had seemed untouchable. Barry had spent his career building his pharmaceutical company Apotex into the largest generic drug producer in the country. As its chairman and CEO, he had become one of the 15 wealthiest people in Canada, with an estimated net worth between $3 and $10 billion. Barry and Honey were also known as two of the country's most generous philanthropists and had made numerous multi-million-dollar donations to hospitals, schools, and charities. Rumors quickly swirled about the mysterious deaths, as investigators rushed to establish an official theory of the case. Police initially considered three scenarios: a double homicide, a double suicide, and a murder-suicide. Media, meanwhile, seemed to gravitate most strongly to the murder-suicide theory, causing some of the Shermans' family members to vehemently push back. According to those close to Barry and Honey, neither the double suicide nor the murder-suicide theories of the case made any sense. There had been no note left to the couple's 4 children, nor were there any signs of serious problems within the Shermans' relationship. In their more than 40 years of marriage, there had never been a single domestic incident reported. Furthermore, the couple had upcoming travel plans and were in the process of designing and building their new home. It is believed that the meeting they had with the builders on the evening of December 13th was the last time they were seen alive. As the investigation continued and more information came out, the police too began to publicly state that they believed the Shermans had been murdered. Barry and Honey's son Jonathan told investigators that his parents, quote, were complicated people, and that there are people out there who would have a grudge against them and would have a reason to hurt them. While it is unclear exactly who Jonathan was referring to, based on the information available, it seems likely that any grudge against the Shermans would have likely originated from Barry's business dealings. Though he had developed a reputation as a philanthropist in some circles, he was also known in the pharmaceutical community as a ruthless competitor. Morton Shulman, a physician and former Ontario Member of Parliament who had once fought him over a drug development, once called Sherman, quote, the only person I have ever met with no redeeming features whatsoever. When journalist Matthew Campbell wrote about Barry and Honey's murders for Bloomberg, he likewise noted that some rival executives had described Barry in, quote, unprintable terms. The animus towards the pharmaceutical tycoon caused some to speculate that the Shermans may have been killed by a competitor, possibly a brand-name drug manufacturer who was tired of Apotex copying their products for the generic market. The police investigation also revealed that in the weeks leading up to the Shermans' deaths, Apotex lost a $500 million court case involving a drug patent. The loss had caused the company to lay off numerous staff, and more cuts were coming. This led police to question whether the deaths could have been the work of a disgruntled employee who wanted revenge against the Shermans. However, Barry also had another side to his business life that seemed equally deserving of suspicion. He was known to financially back larger-than-life personalities who didn't always have the soundest of business plans. Emblematic of these characters was a man named Frank D'Angelo, who was involved in everything from apple juice and beer production to filmmaking. Even after D'Angelo had lost Sherman an estimated $100 million in his endeavors in the food industry, and control of D'Angelo brands had to be handed over to Jonathan, Barry continued to support Frank. These wild gambles reportedly took a toll on Jonathan's relationship with his father, and at one point he even suggested that D'Angelo, or someone connected to him, could be involved in his parents' murders. Finally, there were Barry's estranged cousins, who had spent the better part of the last decade leading up to Sherman's death in a prolonged legal battle with him. The cousins were the children of Barry's deceased uncle, Louis Lloyd Winter, for whom Barry had once worked at his pharmaceutical company, Empire Laboratories. 2 years after Winter died in 1965, Barry purchased the company. The cousins had alleged that Sherman had concealed a provision during Empire's acquisition that would have allowed them to buy 20% of its shares if certain conditions were met, and that Apotex wouldn't have existed without the groundwork laid by their father's company. As such, they sued for an equivalent proportion of Sherman's drug company. However, a judge threw out the claim in September of 2017, just 3 months before Barry and Honey were murdered. The suspicious timing caused many to suspect that the Winters may have been involved. This could explain the lack of forced entry found at the Sherman home, and the seemingly intimate nature of the crime. Nonetheless, it remains a point of speculation. At the current time, more than 3 years out from the deaths of Barry and Honey Sherman, it seems that any answers in the case may still be slow to come. Near the end of last year, Toronto police announced that they had identified a person of interest in the killings, but that person had not been arrested and would not be named at the time. Details of the case, including some of the information about the discovery of the bodies, as well as Jonathan Sherman's statements to police about his parents' enemies, likewise only recently became available, following a court challenge for their release by the newspaper, the Toronto Star. The investigation remains one of the most high-profile of its kind, currently active in Canada.
It's not hard to understand why the story of Ashraf Marwan has garnered so much attention over the years. His bizarre life and equally mysterious death feel as though they've been ripped from the pages of a best-selling spy thriller. However, unlike in the world of fiction, in the case of Ashraf Marwan, there are no definitive answers or satisfying conclusions to be had, only a series of unanswered questions. Marwan was born in Egypt in 1944 to a respected family. His grandfather had been the chief of the country's Sharia courts, and his father was a military officer in the Egyptian Republican Guard. In 1965, at the age of 21, Marwan graduated from Cairo University with a degree in chemical engineering and was conscripted into the army. That same year, he met the second daughter of Egyptian President Gamal Nasser. The pair fell in love and were married in the summer of 1966. With Marwan's marriage came new political inroads. In 1968, he started working in the presidential office under a man named Sami Sharaf, known as the strongman of the Egyptian security service. After briefly leaving for London to continue his studies, Marwan was ordered back to Egypt by Nasser, where he served the president until his death in 1970. Following Nasser's death, Marwan would play an important role in holding the Egyptian government together when a loyalist coup attempt threatened to overturn the rule of incoming President Anwar Sadat. Marwan's backing of Sadat was instrumental in showing that the new president had the support of Nasser's family. Following the coup attempt, many of the loyalists who had participated were arrested, including Marwan's former boss, Sami Sharaf. Marwan was nominated to replace him and became further involved in the inner workings of the Egyptian government. He was also put in charge of relations with Saudi Arabia and Libya. However, during this time, Marwan was also developing relationships with the Israeli intelligence agency known as Mossad. Beginning in 1969, Marwan began passing Egyptian state secrets to the agency and would allegedly become their spy. The story of how this happened is widely disputed. Some say that Marwan first made contact by handing files to a doctor in London with instructions to drop it at the Israeli embassy. Senior Mossad agents, meanwhile, insist that Marwan called the embassy directly and was eventually granted a meeting with intelligence officials. Marwan's motivations for providing state secrets is equally disputed. According to the Israelis, Marwan told them that he was disappointed with Egypt's performance in the 1967 Six-Day War. According to the agents, he simply wanted to be on the winning side. However, there are many who believe that Marwan was deceiving Israel, and that this was the beginning of his successful attempt to work against Mossad as a double agent. Even decades later, there is no clear answer about what Marwan's true motivations were. What we do know is that over the next few years, Marwan worked to gain the trust of Mossad under the codename Angel. Using his new position within the Egyptian government, he was able to pass valuable information to the agency, specifically about Anwar Sadat's intentions to launch a surprise war against Israel. In April of 1973, Marwan warned that the attack was imminent. While this turned out to be a false alarm, his next warning proved useful. On October 6th, a coalition of Arab states led by Egypt and Syria attacked Israel. The operation was mainly focused on the Sinai Peninsula and the Golan Heights, territories that Israel had occupied during the Six-Day War. Because of Marwan's intelligence, Israel was able to mobilize their forces and form a defense just hours before the attack. Without Marwan's warning, it is believed that Israel would have both lost the Golan Heights and a far greater number of troops. The incident would become known as the Yom Kippur War. Following the events of 1973, Marwan managed to maintain a strong presence in Egyptian government for another 3 years. However, by 1976, he had made a number of personal enemies and had been accused of using his proximity to President Sadat to gain personal wealth. Sadat ended Marwan's service to the presidential office in March of that year. After his time in government was over, Marwan turned his attention to business. He eventually managed to amass a fortune worth hundreds of millions of dollars, though just like his work in intelligence, the source of his wealth was always mysterious. He continued to work with Mossad until 1998, though it is unknown what he did for them after leaving the Egyptian government. In 2002, Israeli historian Aaron Bregman publicly released information about Marwan's involvement with Mossad. Specifically, he accused Marwan of being a double agent who had deceived the Israelis and passed sensitive information to the Egyptian government. Little was heard about Marwan again until the afternoon of June 27, 2007, when the Egyptian businessman mysteriously fell from the balcony of his fifth-floor apartment in London. He died from an aortic rupture caused by the impact of the fall. Though many have claimed that the fall was either an accident or a suicide attempt, there are good reasons to suspect something more sinister may have taken place. For starters, both Marwan's wife and those close to him say that he grew increasingly paranoid for his safety in the weeks and months leading up to his death. His wife claimed that he began checking the locks on the doors of their home in a way that she had never previously seen in their 38 years of marriage. Also strange is the fact that witnesses reported seeing two men in suits standing on the balcony moments after Marwan's fall. According to Marwan's family, his memoirs also mysteriously disappeared from his bookshelves on the day of his death. This included 3 volumes, each around 200 pages, as well as tapes in which Marwan had dictated messages. A final bizarre detail worth noting is that Marwan was the 3rd prominent Egyptian to die under these curious circumstances in London. The other 2 people, an actor and former head of the Egyptian Presidential Guard, had also fallen from balconies, and both had been working on their memoirs at the time. This has led to suspicion that the Egyptian government may have been involved in some or all of these deaths and may have committed murder to stop state secrets from being exposed. In Marwan's case, some have also said that the death could have been orchestrated by Israeli intelligence, though it has been suggested that Israel would have had less to gain from killing Marwan than the Egyptian government. A 2010 inquest into Marwan's death likewise failed to provide any satisfying answers. Though traces of antidepressants were found in his blood, there was no evidence that he had been planning to commit suicide. In fact, Marwan had many upcoming plans and appointments, including taking his grandchildren on holiday. Ultimately, medical examiners ruled that neither murder or suicide could be conclusively proven. The case remains a tantalizing mystery.
Though many viewers will undoubtedly be familiar with the ongoing speculation surrounding Jeffrey Epstein confidant Ghislaine Maxwell and her possible involvement in his terrible crimes, those outside the UK may not know that this is not the first time the Maxwell family has been the subject of scandal. In fact, the story of Ghislaine's father, Robert, and his curiously timed death prompted its own host of explanations and conspiracies that remain disputed to this day. Robert Maxwell was born Jan Ludwig Hyman Benjamin Hoch to Jewish Orthodox parents in Czechoslovakia in 1923. As a young man, Maxwell tragically lost most of his family to the Holocaust during the Nazi occupation in 1944. However, he was able to escape to France. Maxwell eventually made his way to Britain, where he fought for the Allies using the name Ivan de Maurier, a name he apparently took from a popular cigarette brand. He won the Military Cross for heroism during his time in the army and was naturalized as a British citizen at the end of the war. 2 years later, he officially changed his name to Ian Robert Maxwell. Maxwell would go on to marry and have 9 children, several of whom would eventually work for his companies. 3 of these children, Ian, Kevin, and Ghislaine, would later become the major focus of media scrutiny in their father's absence. Though Maxwell would eventually become famous for his work in the publishing industry, he first entered the public consciousness in the 1960s as an MP for the Labour Party. He would serve until 1970, when he lost his seat to Conservative challenger William Benyon. Maxwell first achieved acclaim in the business world after building his company Pergamon Press into a major publishing house. However, even with success, there were early signs that Maxwell's business practices were not always on the level. He was ousted from the board of his company following an acquisition deal in which he had lied about the company's profitability in order to inflate share prices. Though he eventually managed to regain control of the company in 1974 after borrowing money. In the 1980s, things really started to take off for Maxwell when he acquired the British Printing Corporation and Mirror Group newspapers. This was followed by a slew of other launches and acquisitions in the ensuing years, as Maxwell became known for his luxurious lifestyle, often appearing at lavish events and sailing to exotic destinations in his super yacht. Aside from his business exploits, Maxwell also became known for his vociferous support of Israel, investing heavily in the nascent country's economy towards the end of his life. It would be this support and his extensive financial ties that would later give rise to the most enduring conspiracy surrounding his death. For all of the success that Maxwell portrayed publicly, however, by 1991, his finances were teetering on the brink. His companies Maxwell Communication Corporation and Mirror Group Holdings were facing mounting pressure due to their failure to repay tens of millions of pounds in loans from Goldman Sachs, and the bank was about to begin selling shares of the companies that it held as collateral. On November 5, 1991, Maxwell was scheduled to meet with the Deputy Governor of the Bank of England. The night before, his son Kevin called him, only to discover that Maxwell was on his yacht in the Canary Islands. The two got into a shouting match over the bank meeting, with Kevin angry that his father seemed to be unprepared. After the bitter argument, Kevin waited until 10 a.m. the following morning before contacting the captain of the yacht. He was told that his father was missing. A short time later, Maxwell's naked, lifeless body was found by Spanish fishermen, floating in the Atlantic Ocean. An inquest later determined that he had died through a combination of a heart attack and drowning, though none of the three pathologists who performed post-mortem examinations could come to an agreement on the exact circumstances of his death. Many believed that the death was a suicide, saying that Maxwell's obviously doomed financial position had caused him to take the easy way out. This theory was further bolstered when news broke that Maxwell had stolen almost £500 million from the pension funds of his companies to finance his corporate debt and pay for his extravagant lifestyle. Still, there were others who said that even in spite of Maxwell's imminent demise, it was not within his character to take his own life. After all, he had been humiliated and nearly financially ruined in the past, and had found a way to persevere. Instead, they said, he had probably fallen from the yacht after losing his footing, likely while urinating over the side of the boat. According to some of Maxwell's family members, this was a frequent habit of his. However, there were those that felt that there was a more conspiratorial nature to the curious death. Only a week before the end of Maxwell's life, he had become embroiled in an exchange of lawsuits with author Seymour Hersh, who accused the business tycoon of working with Israel's Mossad intelligence agency. The conspiracy goes that Mossad killed Maxwell because Israel refused him a loan, and he threatened to retaliate. However, neither Hersh nor anyone else has managed to bring forth conclusive evidence suggesting that Maxwell was murdered. Still, the curious timing meant that rumors have never fully gone away. Following Maxwell's death, it was his sons Kevin and Ian that bore most of the public weight of their father's fraud and collapsing empire. Kevin became Britain's biggest ever bankruptcy at the time, with debts totaling more than £400 million. The two men were both charged in connection with their father's pension fraud, but were eventually acquitted in 1996. However, as we all know now, this would be far from the last time the Maxwell name was associated with a breathtaking scandal.
Michael Rockefeller was born in 1938, the fifth child to his parents Mary and Nelson, and a fourth-generation heir to the famous Standard Oil fortune built by his great-grandfather John D. Rockefeller. Michael's father was heavily involved in politics and would serve not only as governor of New York State, but eventually the vice president of the United States under Gerald Ford. Because of his dynastic upbringing, it was largely assumed that Michael would follow in his father's footsteps. He attended the best schools, and upon his graduation from Harvard in 1960, he seemed poised to begin learning how to manage the family's vast business empire. However, Michael was drawn to a more adventurous way of life. After his father opened the archaically titled Museum of Primitive Art in 1957, it seemed that Michael had discovered his calling. He had already traveled extensively and found himself particularly drawn to the objects contained in his father's collection. It was through this obsession that he made his way to the island of New Guinea, which at the time had been partially colonized by the Netherlands. As part of a scouting trip to the island, Michael went to spend time amongst the Asmat people, an ethnic group residing in what is now the Papua province of Indonesia. Though Dutch colonial authorities had been on the island for almost 10 years by this point, the island's inhabitants had very little contact with the outside world, and many Asmat people had never seen a white person. According to reports, the tribal people believed that the land beyond their island was inhabited by spirits, and that the colonists were supernatural beings. When Michael arrived, he was fascinated by the Asmat people, and became determined to bring part of their world back to America as an exhibit. However, he quickly learned that though the Asmat people were fine with photography, they were not all that interested in selling their cultural artifacts. During this time, Michael also learned about the frequent wars between various Asmat villages, as well as their common practice of beheading enemies and eating their flesh. Though his first expedition soon concluded, Michael was determined to return. He planned a second expedition in the fall of 1961 with the intention of creating a detailed anthropological study of Asmat, as well as bringing back as many of their artifacts as he could get his hands on. He had no idea the expedition would be his last. Michael arrived back on New Guinea in October of 1961, accompanied by a Dutch government anthropologist named René Wassing. After obtaining a homemade catamaran, Michael, Wassing, and 2 Asmat teenagers spent 3 weeks visiting at least a dozen Asmat villages, bartering for as many items as possible. On November 17th, the party headed into some of the most isolated terrain yet, where they encountered violent tides at the mouth of a river which capsized their boat. The 2 Asmat teens were able to swim to safety and went to search for help, leaving Michael and Wassing clinging to the underside of one of the catamaran's hulls. After spending an entire night drifting like this, Michael decided to swim for safety the following morning, telling Wassing that he feared they would drift out into the open sea. He estimated the swim to be somewhere between 3 and 10 miles. While Wassing was spotted from the air that afternoon and rescued a short time later, the search for Michael proved unsuccessful. Despite his family's vast resources, all further attempts to locate Michael would come up short. The disappearance of the young Rockefeller was major news, prompting massive speculation about his ultimate fate. On November 24th, the situation became even more grim when Dutch authorities announced that there was no longer any hope of finding Michael alive. A little over 2 weeks later, the search efforts were called off. However, this announcement failed to provide any satisfying conclusion to the story and only increased the mystery surrounding Michael's disappearance. Some believed that the young heir had simply drowned. Others insisted that he had been attacked by a saltwater crocodile or a shark. Still, others theorized that Michael was alive and well, living amongst the tribal people of New Guinea. However, there was one final dark theory that would become famously associated with Michael's disappearance: that he had been killed and cannibalized by one of the Asmat tribes. Though this theory would be discussed by numerous people over the years, it was most famously explored in the 2014 Carl Hoffman book, Savage Harvest, a tale of cannibals, colonialism, and Michael Rockefeller's tragic quest for primitive art. While researching the book, Hoffman made several trips to Asmat villages, where he came across a particular community that told stories about killing a white man in the early 1960s who had swam ashore. The killing had supposedly happened as revenge for an earlier incident with Dutch colonial officials who had killed prominent members of the community while attempting to settle the dispute between 2 warring villages. According to Hoffman, as he left one of the villages for the final time, he witnessed a man recounting a story of murder, which he believed to be about Michael Rockefeller. Hoffman only managed to videotape the end of the story, and when it was translated, the man was supposedly quoted as saying, "Don't you tell this story to any other man or any other village, because this story is only for us. Don't speak. Don't speak and tell the story. I hope you remember it, and you must keep this for us. I hope. This is for you and you only. Don't talk to anyone, forever, to other people or other villages. If people question you, don't answer. Don't talk to them, because this story is only for you. If you tell it to them, you'll die. I'm afraid you will die. You'll be dead. Your people will be dead if you tell this story. You keep this story in your house, to yourself, I hope, forever. Forever." Despite Hoffman's vivid account, no definitive evidence has ever been found of Michael Rockefeller's remains, leaving the ultimate case of his death an enduring mystery.
That brings us to the end of our list. Know of any other cases like this that you'd like to see featured on the channel? Tell us about them in the comments section below. As always, if you enjoyed our video, don't forget to like and subscribe to Crime Zone for more true crime content like this, making sure to hit the notification bell to stay up to date with our latest videos. Thank you for watching.